My name is Rose, and I'm 19 now, but the story I want to tell you started when I was just 10 years old. That was when my entire world fell apart. It happened on a Tuesday. I still remember coming home from school, excited to show Dad my science test. I got an A, and he always made such a big deal about my grades. But when I got home, Dad wasn't there. His car wasn't in the driveway, and Mom was sitting at the kitchen table with puffy eyes. "Where's Dad?" I asked, dropping my backpack on the floor. Mom just shook her head and told me to go to my room. I didn't understand what was happening. Dad and I were supposed to go for ice cream that evening to celebrate the end of the school week. He'd promised. For days, I kept asking Mom where Dad was, but she'd just get this tight look on her face and change the subject. It wasn't until a week later that she finally sat me down at the kitchen table. "Your father and I are getting divorced," she said flatly. "He's gone, Rose, he left us." I couldn't believe it, but where did he go? "When is he coming back?" "He's not coming back," Mom said, her voice hard. "He abandoned us, he doesn't care about us anymore." Every time I asked about Dad after that, Mom would get angry. "Your father is a terrible man," she'd snap. "He doesn't even pay child support. Nobody knows where he is, and nobody cares." I missed my grandparents too. Before Dad disappeared, we used to visit them every summer in Ohio. They had this big backyard with a tire swing, and Grandma always baked chocolate chip cookies that were still warm when we arrived. But after Dad left, we never went to see them again. "They don't want to see you anymore," Mom told me when I asked about visiting them. "They've disappeared too." That's the kind of family your father comes from, people who don't care about their obligations. Life changed fast after that. Less than a year later, Mom told me she was getting remarried. His name was Greg, and he had a daughter my age named Claire. When they moved into our house, I tried to be friendly with Claire. I thought maybe I could have a sister, someone to talk to. Boy, was I wrong. From day one, Claire made it clear she didn't like me. When I offered to show her around school on her first day, she rolled her eyes and said, "I don't need your help, loser." She'd take my stuff without asking. Once, she borrowed my favorite blue sweater and returned it with a stain that never came out. When I confronted her, she just shrugged and said, "It looks better this way." It was ugly before. We fought about everything. If I was watching TV in the living room, she'd come in and change the channel without asking. If I was using the bathroom to get ready for school, she'd pound on the door and scream that I was taking too long. "God, you're so annoying," she'd say at dinner when I was talking about my day. "Nobody cares about your stupid science club." Mom never said anything when Claire was mean to me. She'd just give me this look like I was being difficult. And Greg would pat Claire on the shoulder like she was the victim. By the time we were 17, things had gotten even worse between us. Claire had her friends over all the time, and they'd talk about me like I wasn't even there. "That's Rose," she'd say with a smirk, "she thinks she lives here." One day, after Claire had accidentally deleted a paper I'd been working on for weeks, we got into a huge fight in the kitchen. "You did it on purpose," I yelled at her. "Prove it," she said, smiling. "Maybe you just forgot to save it." "You're not as smart as you think you are. Why do you have to be such a jerk all the time?" I asked, feeling tears burning behind my eyes. I hated crying in front of her, but I was so frustrated. Claire rolled her eyes. "God, I'm so tired of seeing your face every day. At least I won't have to deal with you much longer." I froze. "What does that mean?" Claire hesitated for a second, then laughed. "Nothing. You just make me so mad sometimes I say stupid stuff, forget it." But I couldn't forget it, something about the way she said it felt real, like she knew something I didn't. And that's when I decided to start paying closer attention to what was happening in my own house. A few days after my argument with Claire, I was passing by Mom and Greg's bedroom when I heard them talking about me. I normally wouldn't eavesdrop, but after what Claire had said, I was suspicious. I stopped outside their door, holding my breath. "She turns 18 next year," Mom was saying. Once she's legally an adult, we won't have to support her anymore. My heart started pounding. Were they talking about me? Rose's room won't stay empty, Greg replied. My niece Amber needs a place to stay for college. She already said she'd pay rent. I covered my mouth to keep from gasping. They were planning to kick me out and replace me with Greg's niece. Claire hadn't been joking, she'd known all along. I backed away from the door quietly and went to my room, my mind racing. That night, I couldn't sleep. The people who were supposed to love and protect me were plotting to throw me away like trash. I thought about confronting Mom, but what would be the point? She'd just deny it or make excuses. No, I needed to make my own plan. The next morning, I called my friend Olivia. We'd been best friends since middle school, and she'd moved into her own apartment right after turning 18. Her parents had helped her with the deposit as a birthday gift. Unlike me, Olivia had a family that actually supported her. When I told her what I'd overheard, she didn't hesitate. Move in with me, she said firmly. My place is small, but we can make it work until you figure things out. I spent the next few days carefully packing my most important belongings when no one was home. I took my clothes, my laptop, important documents, and a few mementos. I left behind the furniture and anything Mom had bought me. I didn't want anything from her anymore. On a Friday night when Mom and Greg were at their monthly dinner with friends and Claire was at a party, Olivia came with her car. We loaded my things quickly, and before I left, I wrote a short note and left it on the coffee table. I've moved out, don't look for me, Rose. I expected to feel sad leaving the house I'd grown up in, but instead, I felt relieved. At Olivia's apartment, I set up a makeshift bedroom in the corner of her living room. It wasn't much, but it felt safer than the house I'd just left. During the first few days at Olivia's, I kept checking my phone. I was sure Mom would call, text, or even come looking for me. I imagined her panicking when she found my note, calling my friends, maybe even the police. I didn't block her number because part of me wanted her to reach out. I wanted her to prove that she cared. But my phone remained silent. No calls, no texts. I checked my social media accounts constantly, but there were no messages there either. After a week passed with no word from Mom, Greg, or even Claire, the truth became impossible to ignore. They didn't care that I was gone. 2 weeks after I'd left home, Olivia and I were eating takeout on her couch when I finally broke down. No one cares about me, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. It's like I never existed to them. Olivia put down her food and looked at me seriously. That can't be true about everyone in your family. What about your dad, your grandparents? People don't just disappear. I shrugged and told her what Mom had always told me, that Dad had abandoned us, that he was probably an alcoholic living on the streets or dead from liver failure, and that my grandparents wanted nothing to do with me. Olivia frowned. Has it occurred to you that your mom might have been lying? I mean, she lied about loving you, so who knows what else she lied about. I stared at her, the possibility slowly dawning on me. All these years, I'd accepted Mom's version of events without question. What if it was all a lie? Your dad has to be somewhere, Olivia continued. What's his name again? Robert Anderson, I said, the name feeling strange on my tongue after so many years of not saying it. Let's look him up, Olivia suggested, opening her laptop. Everyone's on social media these days. We started searching, checking different platforms. And then, just like that, we found him. Robert Anderson, living in Colorado. His profile picture showed a smiling, well-dressed man standing in front of a modern office building. Nothing like the deadbeat alcoholic Mom had described. I scrolled through his profile, my hands shaking. There were photos of him in front of a beautiful house, next to an expensive car, and pictures from trips to Europe and Asia. He looked successful, happy, and very much alive. That's him, I whispered to Olivia, that's definitely my dad. As I continued looking through his profile, I discovered he owned his own technology consulting company. There were photos of him at industry events, giving presentations, shaking hands with business partners. This man wasn't a failure, he was thriving. Olivia squeezed my shoulder. Are you going to message him? My heart was racing. What would I say to the father I hadn't spoken to in 7 years? What if Mom was right about one thing? What if he didn't want anything to do with me? I took a deep breath and opened the messaging window. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I began typing. Hi, this is Rose, your daughter. I know it's been a long time, but I'd really like to talk to you. I stared at those words for a full minute before finally clicking send. The message went out into the digital void, and now all I could do was wait and wonder if he would respond. The 2 hours after sending that message to my father were the longest of my life. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Maybe Mom had been right all along. Maybe he really didn't want anything to do with me. But then, my phone lit up with a notification. My father had responded. His message was long and emotional. He wrote that he was overjoyed that I had reached out to him, that he had always known this day would come. According to him, after the divorce, Mom had told him that I no longer wanted to communicate with him, that I hated him, and that even mentioning his name would send me into tantrums. She had even told him I was seeing a therapist because of him, and that any contact from him could trigger another nervous breakdown. I stared at his words in disbelief. None of that had ever happened. I had never seen a therapist. I had never thrown tantrums at the mention of his name. It was all a lie, an elaborate, cruel lie that had kept my father away from me for 7 years. With shaking hands, I typed a reply, telling him that none of what Mom had said was true. I had been told that he abandoned us, that he was an alcoholic who never paid child support, that he had vanished without a trace. That evening, we arranged a video call. The moment his face appeared on my screen, tears welled up in my eyes. He looked older than in the photos I remembered from childhood, with more gray in his hair and lines around his eyes, but his smile was exactly the same. We talked for hours. I told him everything, about Mom's remarriage, my difficulties with Claire, overhearing their plans to kick me out, and running away to live with Olivia. His face darkened with anger when I mentioned Mom claiming he'd never paid child support. By the end of our conversation, he had made me an offer I never expected, to come live with him in Colorado. He would send money for a train ticket, and I could leave as soon as I was ready. I accepted immediately. What did I have to stay for? No one was looking for me. No one cared that I was gone. The next day, I found an email from my father with the train ticket attached. Olivia drove me to the station, hugging me tightly before I boarded. The journey to Colorado took nearly 2 days. I spent most of it staring out the window, watching the landscape change, wondering what my new life would be like. When the train finally pulled into the station, I spotted my father immediately. He was standing on the platform, scanning the windows of each car. Our reunion was awkward at first. We stood facing each other for a moment before he pulled me into a tight hug. I could feel his tears dampening my hair as he whispered apologies for all the years we'd lost. He drove me to his house, a beautiful 2-story home in an upscale neighborhood with mountain views. Inside, I met his wife, Sarah, who welcomed me warmly. I learned they had been married for 5 years. She worked as an art curator at a local museum while my father ran his technology consulting firm. That night, over dinner, my father explained that he had sent child support payments every month since the divorce. He pulled out a folder filled with copies of checks and bank statements, evidence of his financial support over the years. I learned that the payments had been substantial, enough to cover my basic needs and much more. The realization that Mom had been stealing money meant for me while making me believe my father had abandoned us left me feeling hollow. All those times she'd refused to buy me new clothes for school, claiming we couldn't afford it, all while spending my child support on herself, her new husband, and Claire. Sarah suggested they consult a lawyer about possible child support fraud. While my father agreed it was important, he insisted there was something else we needed to do first: visit my grandparents. The next morning, we drove to a retirement community about 30 minutes away. My grandparents had moved there from Ohio 3 years earlier to be closer to my father. When we arrived at their apartment, my grandmother opened the door and froze, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. "Rose," she whispered, as if afraid I might disappear if she spoke too loudly. My grandfather appeared behind her, his eyes widening. They both looked older than I remembered, more fragile, but their eyes were the same, kind and loving. They enveloped me in hugs, both of them crying openly. Inside their apartment, over cups of hot chocolate, my grandmother remembered it was my favorite. They shared their side of the story. Mom had told them the same lies she'd told my father, that I hated them, that I was seeing a therapist because of the trauma they had supposedly caused me, and that any contact from them would damage my mental health. My grandmother showed me a closet filled with unopened birthday and Christmas gifts for me, one for each year we'd been apart. They had bought them faithfully, hoping that someday they would be able to give them to me. They had been waiting for me to turn 18, planning to reach out directly once I was an adult and my mother could no longer control my communications. That night, back at my father's house, I made the final decision to stay with him permanently. The next day, he contacted a family law attorney specializing in child support disputes. The lawyer, after reviewing all the evidence, concluded that we had a strong case for child support fraud against my mother. The attorney explained that because my father had made some payments from his company accounts rather than his personal account, it might be challenging to prove the exact amount paid over the years. The lawyer warned that if we pursued maximum compensation, the trial could drag on for a year or more. Instead, he suggested attempting to settle the matter out of court first. When Mom discovered that we were building a case against her, she began calling me incessantly. I ignored most of her calls, but eventually answered one out of sheer frustration. She immediately launched into a tirade, calling me ungrateful and disloyal. She claimed I had betrayed her, that I had no idea what she had sacrificed for me over the years. I listened silently until she was finished, then calmly told her that I knew the truth, about the child support, about the lies she had told my father and grandparents, about her plans to kick me out. I reminded her about her and Greg's conversation planning to replace me with his niece and charge her rent for my room. For a moment, she was speechless. Then she tried a different approach, insisting that I had misunderstood, that she had always loved me and only wanted what was best for me. I ended the call, feeling stronger than I had in years. For the first time, I saw through her manipulations. I no longer cared what she thought of me. A pre-trial meeting was scheduled with my mother's attorney a few weeks later. Both sides presented their evidence, and it became clear that Mom was in a difficult position. My father's attorney had obtained bank records showing that Mom had indeed been cashing the child support checks and using the money for personal expenses, designer clothes, jewelry, cosmetic procedures, and spa treatments. The attorney showed purchase records for expensive items that coincided exactly with dates when large child support payments were deposited. There were receipts for Gucci handbags, a Tiffany bracelet for Claire, and even a luxury weekend getaway for Mom and Greg, all purchased with money that was meant for my care and education. Faced with this evidence, Mom's attorney suggested a settlement. After some negotiation, both sides agreed that Mom would pay me $60,000 within 3 months, and in exchange, we would not proceed with the lawsuit. This was significantly less than the total amount of child support my father had paid over the years, but as his attorney pointed out, it would be faster and less stressful than a prolonged court battle. Mom refused to look at me during the entire meeting. She signed the settlement agreement without a word, her face tight with anger. As we were leaving, her attorney handed mine a sealed envelope addressed to me. I waited until I was in my father's car before opening it. Inside was a brief note: "You are no longer my dot, I have disowned you." It was signed simply, Catherine Anderson Mills. Not Mom, not Mother, just her full name, as if I were a stranger. I folded the note and put it back in the envelope, feeling oddly calm. The words were meant to hurt me, but instead, they felt like the final confirmation that I had made the right choice. I never responded to her note. There was nothing left to say. Life with my father and Sarah quickly settled into a comfortable routine. I enrolled in the local high school to complete my senior year, and with their support, I applied to colleges. My father insisted on paying my tuition, and the $60,000 from the settlement went into a separate account for my living expenses during college. I chose a university about an hour away from their home, wanting to be independent but still close enough to visit regularly. My relationship with my grandparents also blossomed. We made up for lost time with weekly dinners and occasional weekend trips. My grandmother taught me to knit, and my grandfather shared his love of classic films. They told me stories about my father's childhood and showed me old photo albums, helping me piece together the family history I had been denied for so long. 6 months after I moved in with my father, I received a call from my mother's cousin Eliza. We had never been particularly close, but she had always been kind to me on the rare occasions we met. She had heard through family gossip that I was living with my father, and she wanted to let me know what had happened back at my mother's house. According to Eliza, Claire and my former room's new occupant, Greg's niece Amber, had been throwing wild parties whenever Mom and Greg were away. One night, about 3 months after I left, a party had gotten out of control. Someone had knocked over a candle, and the fire had spread quickly. By the time the fire department arrived, the house was engulfed in flames. No one was injured, but the house was a total loss. Eliza told me that Mom and Greg hadn't insured the property properly, thinking they could save money on premiums. Without insurance coverage, they had been forced to sell the land at a fraction of its value and use the proceeds for a down payment on a small, outdated apartment on the outskirts of town. Claire had moved in with her biological mother, unwilling to live in the cramped apartment with Mom and Greg. Greg's niece had returned to her parents' home in another state. Mom was working extra shifts at the hospital where she was a receptionist, and Greg had been forced to take a second job to make ends meet. I felt a complex mix of emotions hearing this news, not happiness at their misfortune, but not exactly sympathy either. It seemed like a harsh form of poetic justice. The house where I had been made to feel unwanted was gone, and the new life they had planned without me had fallen apart. A few weeks later, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. When I answered, I was surprised to hear my mother's voice. She sounded different, tired, subdued. She asked how I was doing, making awkward small talk before finally getting to the point: she needed money. She explained their financial situation, emphasizing how difficult things had become. Then she suggested I could ask my father or grandparents to help them out, just until they got back on their feet. I listened quietly until she finished. Then I reminded her of the note she had sent me after the settlement. "You said I'm no longer your daughter," I told her. "You disowned me, remember? I don't give money to strangers." There was a long silence before she hung up. She never called again. Now, at 19, I'm in my second year of college, studying psychology. I've become particularly interested in family dynamics and the lasting effects of parental alienation. Sometimes I wonder if understanding these concepts will help me make sense of what happened in my own family, why my mother did what she did. My father and I still have our awkward moments. 7 years is a long time to be apart, but we're learning to be father and daughter again. Sarah has become a trusted friend and mentor. Last Christmas, when my father's company had a particularly good year, he surprised me with my own car. It wasn't expensive or flashy, just a reliable used model, but it meant the world to me. My grandparents have become fixtures in my life. I spend one weekend a month at their retirement community, where Grandma is teaching me to bake her famous cookies, insisting that the recipe must stay in the family. Grandpa, despite his arthritis, still insists on beating me at chess regularly. As for my mother, I haven't spoken to her since that phone call asking for money. I've heard through Eliza that she and Greg are still struggling financially. Claire apparently drops by occasionally but doesn't stay long. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the parallel lives I've lived, the years of believing I was unwanted by half my family, and now, the reality of being surrounded by people who never stopped loving me. I think about the power of lies and how easily the truth can be distorted when you're only hearing one side of the story. I don't hate my mother. That might surprise people who know what she did, but hatred takes too much energy, and I'd rather focus on the relationships I'm building now. I've learned that family isn't just about blood or legal ties, It's about the people who make space for you in their lives, who see you clearly and love you anyway. That's the family I've found, that's the family I choose.